Another great Philadelphia Eagles now coming your way on this beautiful Friday. My name is Chase Sr. Welcome into the show. We're broadcasting once again live from Super Bowl Radio Row in downtown San Francisco. Appreciate everybody for your support of the content all throughout the week. We've pushed out some fantastic videos. We've done some awesome interviews, and that's going to continue with today's edition of Philadelphia Eagles Now on this Friday, February 6th. So coming up here on the show, a lot of developing news for the Eagles here. Are Landon, Dickerson, and Lane Johnson going to retire this offseason? This is a storyline that today has really been a popular talking point among people across the National Football League. Is Jim Schwartz to the Eagles as their defensive coordinator in 2027 inevitable if Vic Fangio retires? Because, of course, Vic Fangio contemplated a retirement this offseason, even last year after the Eagles won the Super Bowl in taking down Kansas City. I'll also be joined today by the legendary Greg Cosell, senior producer for NFL Films for 46 years. He is one of the brightest football minds out there. He's been doing all types of shows throughout the week. He goes on with Colin Cowherd, I think, on a weekly basis, and we'll talk some Eagles with him as well. You don't want to miss that. But let's begin here. A year ago, Philadelphia Eagles Now was in New Orleans. The Big Easy, getting ready for Super Bowl 59, Eagles, Chiefs, and what a week that was from a content standpoint, going out on Bourbon Street, catching up with Eagles fans. I remember that Eagles fans were occupying New Orleans at a level of like 80-20 compared to Chiefs fans. And Eagles fans just took over the entire city. One of my observations, too, in being around the Eagles last year compared to being around the Eagles in 2022 when they played the Chiefs in Arizona, the Eagles in 2022 were happy to be there. The Eagles in 2024 were locked in. The mindset, how they approached the game, their preparations, how they handled the week, they were cold-blooded assassins. And that's a credit to Nick Sirianni for the message that he was able to convey to his team. And what did the Eagles do? They went out there on Sunday against the Chiefs in Super Bowl 59, almost a year ago at this point, and they beat the brakes off of the Chiefs. So, with all that being said, if you want the Eagles to get back here next year, to be playing for a Super Bowl a year from now in Los Angeles, I want you to hit that thumbs up icon and like the video right now. Jeff McLane of the Philadelphia Inquirer on his podcast, which really got this conversation in motion, talking about the futures of both Lane Johnson and Landon Dickerson. Lane Johnson in 2025, injured a lot. Landon Dickerson injured a lot, but played more than Lane. But he was so hampered by a multitude of injuries, and Landon Dickerson did not play well. Lane Johnson, when he was on the field, at least did play well. So here's the quote from Jeff McLane on his podcast. In terms of Lane and his future, here's what I can say. He's definitely not sure if he's coming back or not. That's the impression that I get. You would think maybe this would make it a little less likely. When you're looking at retirement, it's can my body do it again? Do I want to do it again? Lane has a very high standard for himself. I've also seen Brian Baldinger walking around here at the Moscone Center in downtown San Francisco on Super Bowl Radio Row. I've been trying to catch up with him, but he's been doing all these interviews and he's been busy doing his own content on a bunch of shows. But he was on with Anthony Gargano of PHLY, I believe, this morning, and he kind of hinted that Lane Johnson was going to come back in 2026. He's kind of been year to year over the last few years. We'll certainly see, but he's 35, soon to be 36 years old, and at some point soon, yeah, he's going to walk away from the game of football, and he's going to go down as one of the best players in the history of this Eagles organization, and I think that he is a first-ballot Hall of Famer, even with that PED suspension earlier in his career. So that's what's going on with Lane Johnson. We'll see. With Landon Dickerson, it's also a we'll see, but this is kind of alarming too because he's a lot younger than Lane Johnson. And McLane said on Landon Dickerson may be even more of a question mark than Lane Johnson. And then Mike Garafolo of the NFL Network had this report. An offseason of significant change for the Eagles could include guard Landon Dickerson's uncertain future. Jeff McLane mentions here that Dickerson's no certainty to return. I've heard some of the same. Only 27 years old and 5 years into his career, but his body has been through a lot. And it certainly has. And what people are talking about when they're talking about Dickerson's uncertain future would be the retirement right in the thick of his prime. But his body has been beaten up and battered. You also have to factor in the position that he plays, right? In 2016, when he was a freshman at Florida State, he had a season-ending right knee ACL tear after playing the first 7 games of the year. In 2017, when he was a sophomore at Florida State, season-ending right ankle injury after playing 4 games. 2018, junior year at Florida State, severe left ankle sprain after 2 games, leading to a medical redshirt. Transfers to Alabama. In 2019, relatively healthy, started 13 games. But then in 2020, his senior year at Alabama, he tore his ACL in his left knee in the SEC championship game against Florida, and he missed the playoff games but did return for the final snap in the national championship win over Ohio State. That's just his collegiate career. In his NFL career, preseason 2021, after he was the second-round pick out of Bama, missed time recovering from the 2020 college left ACL tear, so he missed week 1 of his rookie year. 2021 thumb injury in week 17. 2022 foot sprain in week 2. 2023 thumb injury in week 15. And in 2025, he had multiple injuries. He underwent the meniscus procedure and surgery on his right knee during training camp, did return for week 1, but then he was never the same player. And in fact, it was kind of sad to see him play the way that he did and see him struggle the way that he did, which he probably saw it on tape himself, and he said, if I'm going to put that on tape, I'm a prideful guy, and if I can't get healthy, I don't want to look like that. I don't want to be remembered as that. And professional athletes do think in that way with that line of thinking. And so he had the meniscus procedure and surgery during the preseason. Then he had the back injury early in the year, left the week 1 game against the Cowboys early, ankle injury ruled out for week 5 and 6. And it was also mentioned in other weeks. Then he had additional ankle and calf issues. And remember what he said after the year? Caused a lot of people in the locker room and a lot of us who heard that quote to kind of look around and say, that's not great. He said after the season, I wish I knew what the future held, and I wish I knew if I could get my body right. So this offseason, you're looking at the possibility of the Eagles losing legendary offensive line coach Jeff Stoutland, who has coached this team since 2013 and is one of the best in the history of the league as far as offensive line coaching goes. They could lose Lane Johnson and Landon Dickerson. So we could see some massive changes along the offensive line for the Eagles. And if that is the case, the offseason plans in the draft and free agency completely alter for Howie Roseman. And it might be at a point where Howie Roseman has to address the offensive line early in the draft with multiple picks. Because when you think about this Eagles team in 2025, was Kevin Patullo a problem? No doubt about it. But I think the one thing that they need to fix, especially when you look at what other teams do across the NFL and have been doing at a high level, the ones that win, how the Eagles have won at a high clip in recent years, and the teams that are left right now, Seattle, New England playing for the Super Bowl, the Eagles need to get back to being dominant up front with their offensive line. And that's always been an emphasis with Howie Roseman, Joe Banner in the early 2000s, but especially with how this Eagles team is built. Especially with Sean Mannion coming in, the Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur systems and schemes. They prioritize and like to run the football. Those offenses are predicated on establishing the run. And last year, the Eagles just could not do that at a consistent rate and not even close to a high level. Injuries played a role in that. Jordan Mailata declining a little bit played a role in that. A lack of offensive lineman continuity. Again, the play designs, the play calling, those were issues too. I don't think it was a Saquon Barkley problem. I think it was all those other problems being problems for the Eagles running attack. But if they can't fix that offensive line, if they can't run the ball in a more efficient manner in 2026, I think we'll see another frustrating offensive season for Philadelphia. Another topic here on the show is Jim Schwartz. So Jim Schwartz was passed up on for the Cleveland Browns head coaching job. He got beat out by Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens, who led those Ravens offenses to being one of the more prolific offenses in the National Football League during his time as offensive coordinator. They were top 5 in EPA per play, led the NFL in explosive plays. Lamar Jackson was an MVP in 2023 who had 49 of 50 first-place votes, if I'm not mistaken. And Todd Monken was also the OC for the 2020, 2021, 2022 seasons at Georgia. And he did some great things at Georgia. Think about this. He developed Stetson Bennett into an NFL quarterback, right? And since he left the University of Georgia, Georgia has not won a college football playoff game. But Jim Schwartz had been the defensive coordinator for the Browns since 2023 under Kevin Stefanski. He coached under Bill Belichick as an assistant for Cleveland in the early 1990s. It's very rare to find a coach who wants to be the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. Jim Schwartz wanted that job. His defenses, some of the best in the league during his tenure at defensive coordinator, but he got beat out. He was very bitter. And according to reports, he cleared out his office and he stormed out of the building and said, "I'm out of here." He was peeved, rightfully so. If you got beat out for a job that you really wanted, I imagine that you would be upset too. Well, news broke this morning that he is resigning as defensive coordinator of the Browns. He wasn't lying. He will not be the DC under Todd Monken. Todd Monken even said, "I'm not tied to Jim Schwartz. We don't need to hire him as our defensive coordinator." But the plan for Schwartz is, because he's under contract for 2026, is for him to sit out this upcoming season. Vic Fangio this offseason contemplated retirement. He approached the Eagles a few weeks ago and said he was stepping away from coaching. When that happened, yes, the Eagles were able to convince him to come back for this upcoming season. The Eagles did reach out to Jim Schwartz and Jonathan Gannon. Jonathan Gannon is now the DC for the Green Bay Packers, so the Eagles wouldn't be able to hire him, of course, and I wouldn't like the Eagles bringing him back, although I think what he did was a little bit underrated with Philadelphia, but I just think from a personality standpoint, he's a little bit of a fraud, and Eagles fans don't like him for that. But the Eagles did reach out to Jim Schwartz, gauging his interest in being the Eagles defensive coordinator. Well, if this is indeed the last year for Vic Fangio, Christian Parker is now the DC for the Dallas Cowboys. If Vic Fangio steps away after this year, will Jim Schwartz be the Eagles defensive coordinator in 2027? It's one of those things where it seems like the writing is on the wall. It seems inevitable that that could happen if Nick Sirianni is still the head coach. Eagles showed interest in him this offseason, and if you're Jim Schwartz, you look at some of the personnel on the defensive side of the ball. You've got the corners for your scheme with Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell. You've got some dogs up front. You have some really solid linebackers. This would be one of the better defensive coordinator jobs for any candidate across the NFL. So we'll certainly keep tabs on that, and we'll circle back to this over the next several months, but certainly this time next year. All right, coming up next year, Greg Cosell going to hop on board and join the show here on Philadelphia Eagles Now. Spent a couple of minutes with him. He's been a senior producer at NFL Films for 46 years. He's one of the brightest, most intelligent football minds in the media space. And we talked about the hiring of Sean Mannion as OC, how this offense is going to look a lot different in 2026, how that's not necessarily a bad thing. Can Jalen Hurts play in a Shanahan, McVay, LaFleur offense? I thought Cosell had an interesting answer with that. Was he surprised that Jeff Stoutland stepped away from this Eagles coaching staff? Will this lead to big changes and personnel changes for the offense, but along the offensive line, and the potential retirements of Lane Johnson and Landon Dickerson? What could that mean for Philadelphia? Greg Cosell joining the show. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Give me a follow on social media, X, Instagram, TikTok, at Chase_Senior. And here's Greg Cosell right here on Philadelphia Eagles Now. A lot going on with the Philadelphia Eagles. I'd love to ask you about the addition of Sean Mannion. What do you think about the hiring of an inexperienced young offensive coordinator who's going to bring some new concepts to the Eagles?
I love it. I think at some point you have to have change. And I mean, I think people would probably say, even in the building, that this year was not a good season. It didn't end the way they wanted, so they felt it was time for a change. I love giving young coaches an opportunity. They all have to start somewhere. I love the infusion of new ideas. I think that's really good, because then you challenge the players. You know, because I think when players, there's pros and cons to everything. Obviously, if a player's in the same system for a long time, that's good. But if it's, for whatever reason, it sort of seems like it stalls, you want an infusion of new ideas. I think it's great. I mean, this team's been very, very successful. I know probably in Philly, I'm sure there's a lot of angst right now and people are probably not happy, but you can't lose sight of the fact that this team wins. They've won a lot of games. They've been in 2 of the last 4 Super Bowls. You know, Nick Sirianni, no one knows the division of labor in the building. You'd have to be there, but he's the head coach. He's done a phenomenal job. Look at the record. That's what you have to go by. So the infusion of new talent on the offensive side, challenge Jalen Hurts, challenge the offense. I love that.
You mentioned Jalen Hurts. Do you think that he can thrive in this Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur type of system?
You know, it's funny. I wouldn't have thought so necessarily based on the way in which he plays, what his strengths are and his limitations are. But they obviously believe he can, or they wouldn't have done what they did. Now, I think it'll be a work in progress. I think it'll take some time. You know, what they probably hope is that Jalen is open to it. We know sometimes he can be stubborn. That's his personality. But they wouldn't have done this if they didn't believe that he could thrive in it. Because they're not hiring people because they think Jalen Hurts can't play in it. So, you know, it might take some time. It's a brand new offense. The terminology is different. The methodology is different. The way it's taught is different. But he's a veteran quarterback. He's had success in the league. They believe he can do it. Let's wait and see.
In this transitional phase, new change at offensive line coach and with a new run game coordinator coming in, were you surprised about the Jeff Stoutland news? Not really. Your reaction to that and why you think this could be beneficial for this Eagles offense moving forward?
Well, you know, I guess in some ways I wasn't surprised just because the run game with that sort of McVay-Shanahan style, which is that's Mannion's background, I think that there's a specific kind of run game that is taught. And look, I'm not saying Jeff Stoutland doesn't know that, but I think they wanted to bring in someone, you know, who really is schooled in it and starts from scratch and teaches that. Now, they've got some potential O-line issues. You know, Juergens did not have a really good season, and he was hurt a lot. There's a lot of talk about Dickerson now. You know, he's a guy, unfortunately, that's been injured so much going back to college. I read a report that, you know, he's considering retiring. I mean, they might have to retool that whole offensive line. I mean, Lane Johnson is, 35, 36? Who knows what he's going to do? You know, unfortunately, and I think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, but unfortunately, he's been hurt a lot. You know, you get older, father time catches up to everyone. So they probably have to retool the O-line, and they might look for a different kind of player given the new scheme.